Welcome to Forged in the Fires podcast with Fireman Rob. Being a fireman, father, veteran, husband, world record holder, and Ironman, he brings stories of experience to impact your life while challenging you to live it. What do you want from your life? Why do you want it? Are you willing to go through the challenges to get there? If you have the courage to take that first step, let this podcast be the catalyst to start your fire while you bring the resilience to make it continue to burn. Our lives are made up of moments called right nows. So let's get started. Forged in the Fires podcast with your host, Fireman Rob, begins now.
All right, welcome back to Forged in the Fires podcast. I'm your host, Fireman Rob. Today's guest, you know what? This is going to be inspiring. This is what I needed today to scale up my life and get back in the driver's seat. Nick Bradley, such an amazing individual. Scale Up Your Business podcast. It's ranked number one on iTunes and Spotify. And not only that, he's done well over 67 marathons and 24 ultra marathons worldwide. Nick, it's so great to have you on the show today.
Hey, Robert. It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
I didn't want to take up the whole time telling everybody all the great things you've done because I want to.
It's embarrassing when people read that because you kind of think, really? Who are you talking about?
Isn't it great? You get this great intro and this great celebration of all the things you've done. You go, gosh, I should just be more tired.
Yeah, well, I've just got back, as we record this, I've just got back from literally a tour. I did 4 countries, 10 cities, 24 days, and something like just under 20,000 miles of travel. So wow. I got back on Saturday, so I don't really know what time it is now. but I'll do my best.
It's time to go to bed, Nick.
Yeah, I'm breaking through. I'm one of these people that I have to break through jet lag. I don't believe it, right? I've got to just kind of stay up and get with the time zone that I'm in.
I love it. Well, I want to dive into a lot of different things because your story is something of, it's just an amazing story. But I first want to dive into your 67 marathons and 24 ultras. But you said you've done more. What was the premise behind doing those?
Yeah, it's, you know what, if I'm really honest about it, I like to be quite, I don't say vulnerable, but if I look back, I was trying to mask other things that were happening in my life, right? So at the time I was involved in private equity, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that. And I didn't really enjoy the place that I was in. So I did the running for 2 reasons. One, when you go and run something like that, you have to be very present, right? Like, it's painful, it's challenging, it's all of those things, but you're very present. And the second thing was my grandfather, who was like a father figure to me growing up. He was the first Australian to run a marathon after open heart surgery. He had double bypass surgery. Wow. And he ran that race when I was 10 years of age in Adelaide, South Australia. And he ran it in just over 4 hours, which is good for any standard. Yeah, and I know. And I remember I was actually at the finish line, and he said to me before the race, because everyone said he was not going to make it because no one had ever done this before after that, like, traumatic surgery. And I remember he went and bought me a TV, like this massive TV. And it's like, he wasn't being overly dramatic, but he was like, this may be the last gift, so I want to get you something decent. Anyway, long story short, I still remember him crossing the line. In fact, behind me here as we record this, I've got a picture of him crossing the line in 1984. And I think that seeing him do that has always inspired me around running. And that's one of the other reasons to connect with him and to kind of be present into that sort of memory, if you like, is one of the reasons I've done so much of it.
I love that. And you're mentioning the masking of something. And I think I'm betting there is 90% of the people who are listening and who have done races understand what you mean by that. Can you explain more of how that helped but also hindered you when you weren't doing races to be able to continue to move forward?
I used running as an outlet, I think. So, if I think about it, I was working, as I said before, in private equity. And for those who are not accustomed to what that is, it's pretty high level mergers and acquisitions work. Doing deals, very stressful, but also the characters that you're around. People say, like, you're that your network is your net worth, and you're the sum average of the 5 people you spend time with, all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
Well, I was surrounded by people where the only thing that really mattered was money, right?
Oh, yep.
Beyond actually sometimes maybe doing the right thing.
Right.
So it was stressful because the numbers that we were playing with, the sums were sort of 8, 9, up to 10 figures, 10 figures being obviously over $1 billion. And the fact that everyone was focused on their take, if you like, and what they could get from it. So, I wouldn't say it was like criminal. There's a point where
we do have some police officers that listen to this, so just be careful, Nick.
Well, it depends, how you define that sort of thing. But for me, it's more about values and standards, right? And so I was doing that for a while, and after a while, I realized that some of the things were just against my values. So the running, to come back to your question, was an outlet of trying to kind of run away from, but also repress that situation, that I was in for a period of time.
Yeah, and now transitioning, taking that what you learned from running and taking what you learned from that, and now you have this great podcast that is scale up your business. But it's more than that, because your mission is to help others to follow their hearts, reach for their dreams, show up, realize their true potential. What has that podcast done for you? Because I know for myself, to be able to listen to somebody like yourself give such valuable advice and be vulnerable like you are, what has that podcast been able to do for you to scale up your own life?
Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning for people listening as the reason why I did it. So it came from a position of wanting to transition out of that private equity environment. And I had a mentor at the time who said, the way to do that is to build up your own brand. But more importantly, if you have a media platform, be that a podcast or YouTube or whatever, it can actually be quite a cathartic experience.
Yeah.
So I started the podcast. The first, I think, 20 episodes of the podcast is me just talking into a mic in a dark room somewhere. And you know what I mean? Like, exactly.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean.
And you don't expect anyone to listen, right? You don't, maybe I was probably selling myself short at the time, but I didn't know anything about this world that we're in now. I knew about the other stuff. Anyway, so I used it as a way of almost journaling, but I was using my voice and I was just telling my story and having some perspectives. And the reason I called it Scale Up Your Business is I thought, you know what? I'm going to make this a podcast about stuff that I know, right? And I wanted to genuinely help people with the experiences that I had around sort of turnarounds and scale ups. But I'm going to provide a hidden message in the podcast. And the people who listen to it and kind of listen to it religiously, so to speak, are going to get the message. But people who just dip in and dip out, they'll get value just from the content. And I'm just going to say what the hidden message is. I will.
Don't say it. Don't say it. You got to go and listen to this podcast. I don't want you to give up your message.
I reckon you know what it is, Robert. I think you know. There's something in there that's a bit deeper, is all I'm going to say, than just, how do you, improve your marketing, or how do you hire people and be a better leader? There's a bit more to it.
A lot more. And when you look at the guests that you've brought on, what would you say your main objective of when you bring somebody on? What do you want to be able to give to that audience that obviously is invested in that secret message, that mission that you're putting forward to them? What are you trying to bring on to be able to help them in their own lives?
So what I try and do, and this is a style thing, I think, more than anything else, and I've kind of worked it out over time, it wasn't like it in the beginning, is I don't really thoroughly prepare for the conversations. And I call them conversations, similar to what we're doing here.
Right.
Because I like to be as present as I possibly can. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find the fabric underneath the person that has allowed them to do what they've done, whatever that is. Sometimes it's a fantastic success story, sometimes it's a challenging story, but I'm trying to look for the deeper motivations and the why, if you like, behind. So the only way I've found to do that successfully is just to listen, really listen, and just plug in to certain things that are said in the moment. And so what I want my listeners to get from that is everyone to some extent has both, good and bad, things that they are great at, things that they are finding challenging, great days and bad days, right? Everyone has that. And I'm trying to make it clear to people that it doesn't matter how successful you look from the outside, you're the same person really that anyone else is. And you can get inspired by learning from others that maybe, just maybe, you put on a pedestal or maybe you think are above you. I just want to give an insight into those people as real as I possibly can.
I love that. And it's, you read I love the best moments. Make sure you go and listen to the Scale Up Your Business podcast, because there is that hidden message. There's also a lot of takeaways that you can actually just put into that purpose of your daily life and the interactions. I want to go back to, do you still have that TV that your grandpa bought you?
No, not anymore. I do. I have some things. So, when I run a marathon, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I've got the medal that he was given in 1984, and I always carry it.
You're kidding me. Wow.
No, sometimes I carry it in my hand, particularly if I'm in a position, particularly for the ultra marathons where, if you run like 100 miles or something like that, there's no guarantee you're going to finish. It's definitely not like not to downplay a marathon, because a marathon, but with a bit of training and discipline, I think most people can finish a marathon. They may not do it in a great time, it might take them 8 hours, but they can finish it. In an ultra marathon, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I carry that medal as, again, a form of inspiration. So the TV's had a day. It wasn't like a thin flat screen that you put on the wall.
It was the big box.
It was like the size of a car, like a small car. So that's gone. But there's a few other things that I carry as, let's call it, mementos.
I was going to say that would suck to carry that TV on that run. I don't think you'd make most of those ultras.
Oh my God. You know what? It's like, if I look back, it probably is the size of a small Mini, those mini cars. And it probably cost like 4 or 5 times what a TV costs these days. But,
by far.
But it was a nice gesture, and I understand why he did it. So there you go.
I love it. So where do you go when you go on those ultras, right? Because there is so many different moments and so much time to be able to talk in your own head. And I think that's one of the things that I found beneficial about racing was I hate talking in my own head. I'm not a good conversationalist with myself. How did you get through those moments and those long 100-milers? Because there's so many times where you can just stop and nobody's going to know.
Yeah, and you've got to treat it like, it comes back to the reason why you're doing it. And for me, and this is just a personal belief, right? If you do something that feels really challenging, not what I would call impossible, because if something feels absolutely impossible, then actually a lot of the time you can give up before you start, right? So if someone said to me, Nick, I want you to climb Everest tomorrow, well, I'm not going to even start that because I'm not prepared for it, even though I'd probably, from a mindset perspective, think, oh, that could be fun.
You've got that crazy mindset. I agree.
You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
But something like a 100-mile race, like, you can prepare for it as much as you possibly can, but there are environmental things that will hit you. Sometimes it's just how you feel, right? So it is like, like definitely like a mental thing. Sometimes it's physical, like you might have eaten something the day before and it's going to affect you in the race. You might fall, because a lot of the stuff I do is in trail running and mountain running. So you're not just running on straight sort of road and bitumen, right? So you've got all that going on. So there's all these different things that are going on. And the reason I like it is I think if people try something that is almost impossible, but possible, right? If you get my point.
Yep.
And you survive it and you complete it, it lifts you up to a different dimension of what you think is possible. It's sometimes described, Robert, as a thermostat, right? The idea that we all have this internal thermostat, and once you go over the thermostat, it feels uncomfortable. And most people, again, try and get back to their comfort zone. Mm-hmm. I think if you have these challenges, be it a race like that or other things, and you succeed, you lift the degrees on the thermostat, and all of a sudden you're more comfortable in a different dimension than you were previously. And then to finish the point, you take that everywhere else in your life. So I take that to my relationships, to business, anything else I want to put my mind to, with a stronger level of resilience.
Wow. Yeah. I love that analogy of the thermostat. I've never actually heard that one, but I love that analogy because it's so true. Now, kind of transitioning from that running aspect, to your bit. I mean, you're a very successful business person. Sold 22 businesses, combined valuation of more commas than I've ever seen in my life. Maybe when I write, but it's more commas than I've seen after a dollar sign or a pound sign or whichever. How do you kind of keep yourself grounded with being that successful in business and consistently going out and doing more?
Yeah, I don't get too attached to any of these things. So, the numbers are what they are. And
right.
like I said beforehand, there's good and there's evil in anything, right? So, with great success, if you call it that, in the business world, comes other things that hit you in different ways, right? So I think I'm grounded on the basis that I'm relatively pragmatic about it, and I never let my head get too sort of wound up in it. That's why I wasn't joking about when you start off by not reading the full sort of bio, because it is a bit embarrassing.
It shouldn't be embarrassing. I'll trade you bios.
It's just that I've probably been brought up to be relatively appreciative of what you have, right? And to be quite humble about certain things. So I look at everything that I do now. I can work with a business that's relatively small, right? And I can work with a business that's a lot bigger with lots of as you said, commas behind its revenue performance or profit, and I don't necessarily think about it any differently. A lot of the time, I'm working with individuals, right? And I often say that there's no business to business or consumer to consumer. It's person to person, and it's always been that. So for me, it's about the individuals and what they're trying to achieve, and any one of those things is important.
How often do you see in business? Because I think there's a lot of people that fear success because they don't know if they get to that, that large success valuation, everything, that they're not sure where to go from there. How do you get a lot of those people that you work with in business?
Yeah, I get it all the time, and I'll give you the three questions that I ask, because I think it will help people listening no matter where they are. And a lot of what I do now is what I call scale to sale, right? So I focus working with business founders on how they can create a successful exit in their business. And there's various reasons why I believe that's important, but it's the scale up of a business to a successful exit so that the founder can create freedom, wealth, and impact. And it's often in that order. And the reason I think that's important is that once you create a certain level of financial freedom, then most often, this is my belief, I know it's not always 100% true, but it is for the people that I work with, quite often they then want to go off and make a bigger impact in the world, make a bigger contribution, because they're not worried so much about, maybe supporting their families anymore and having to work all the time. So the three questions I ask is what is that life-changing number for you, right? What's the number that would mean that you wouldn't have to think about money again? And I can tell you right now, it's not $1 billion. Right? That's not the number. You may say that's a number that you'd like to, but that's a vanity number. No one needs $1 million, right? No one needs it. But there's a figure, it's usually in the millions, where people say, I can pay everything if I want. I can, educate my kids. I can go on great holidays. I've got some investments that could turn into a bit of generational wealth for my family. It's that sort of number. So that's the first question. The second question I ask is, why does that actually matter? Right? Why does it matter? And that's not a Simon Sinek why thing here. This is like, a deeper motivation. And sometimes that can be about just proving to yourself that you can do it. And then the last question, which is the most fundamental question, particularly for entrepreneurs and business owners, is what you're doing now, right? Either in your business or what you're focused on, is what you're doing now going to get you to that number? And quite often, a lot of people, they look at that and go, actually, you know what? No. And they need to change, or they need to pivot or do something different. But they're quite important things, because I think if you can answer those three questions honestly, it can really set you up for, success, focus, whatever that is on the business context, which then can lead to other things.
I love those. I wrote those questions down because I need to ask them to myself. How does, I think I see that the second question of why does it matter? And how often do challenges change that first question or the third question, because, you know, one of your challenges in life that helped you to grow and succeed was your dad passing suddenly.
Yeah.
How does that change that trajectory for you? And how do you help others to realize that it's not a straight path?
Yeah, I think what I often say, exactly what you just said, actually, is that you've got to expect that it's not going to be a straight line, right? So the actual path doesn't really matter, but most people don't set out with a decent intention of what they're trying to get to. You know, sometimes that's called vision, but I often say if you don't know where you're trying to get to as a marker in the sand or a North Star or something like that, and you don't know where you are today, you haven't done the inventory or the analysis to know where you are today, you've got no chance of even being able to work out what that path is. So, I mean, to go back to your question about my dad, so that was an interesting one because he came back into my life after a 35-year hiatus. So the reason I was close to my grandfather growing up is because my dad left our family when I was 2. And I was sort of told that, you know, he was not a great guy, you know, not very successful, all this sort of stuff. What I found out later in life, when he came back into my life when I was 37, is that he'd been a millionaire twice. So he was a millionaire once before he was 40, then he was bankrupt, and then he became a millionaire again.
Wow.
Just because it's an interesting thing, I'll tell you what happened. The first business that he had was a jewelry business. It was in Collins Street in Melbourne, and the actual site where it was got blown up in the Turkish consulate bombing that was in the 90s, I think. I can't remember the exact date.
Oh my God.
And because that was considered a terrorist incident, right? You know, this is before terrorism was massive, right? Yeah. He couldn't claim any insurance, so he had to bankrupt the business.
Oh my God.
I know. So, I mean, this is a longer conversation than we have time for. But anyway, what happened was, so he came back into my life. A lot of the stuff that I'd heard about him was wrong. You know, he was a very successful entrepreneur, and this was the epiphany for me, right? Or the kind of transformation is all those years in private equity leading up to that point. Quite often, my role and the role of the private equity firms was to focus more on the investors and not the founders. So we would take a disproportionate share of the value of the business that these entrepreneurs were making. You know, of course, they would make some money, but not as much as we would make in the private equity world. And that's because we were pretty clever with what we would do, right?
Right.
It was exploitive to some extent. Now, when my dad came back in, I found out that he was one of these successful entrepreneurs. I kind of realized that for years I'd been taking advantage of all these amazing people, and one of those people were like my dad. So I had to make the decision about whether I wanted to stay in that world or leave, and I decided to leave. And one of the first things I did, back to your question previously, was I started the podcast.
Wow. That is, that blows me away. Because that didn't take some guts, though, to step away from all that.
It did, but I had a moment, and you know, I had a moment when this all happened where I went. Imagine it like this: you go to bed at 3 a.m. and you wake up in pain, and you realize very, very quickly that something's not right. And when you go to the bathroom and you look in the mirror, you look at your jaw and it's all swollen, and it's like you've been smashed in the face.
Yeah.
And you realize very quickly that what you've done is you've bit down and grinded your teeth so badly that you've broken the back 2 molars on the right side of your jaw. So that happened to me in 2017.
Wow.
And 2 or 3 weeks later, I made the decision to leave that world. Now, I didn't leave straight away, but I made the decision to leave straight away. And that took me on the journey that I'm on now with Scale Up Your Business and all the other things I'm doing. So it was brave, but I also had a health situation. Your body sometimes manifests and gets very, very acute with what it needs to tell you if your brain's in a place where you're not listening.
Exactly. Isn't that amazing? And I'm sure you learned that too through your running, because there's a lot of times your body is like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever thought you could do.
Oh yeah.
And your mind goes, no, this is pretty fun.
Oh yeah, and I've got a history of that. So for me, my body has to sometimes give up or do something like the teeth incident, as I call it, just so I take note and listen. Otherwise, I'd probably end up in a worse place, right? So I'm very grateful of it.
So true. So true. I love it. Make sure you also go to nickcbradley.com and you can find out more about everything that Nick is doing. Going into, you have this great program. It's called the Growth Accelerator Partnership. Tell me more about that, because all those words together, it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, well, yeah, I need that.
I do a few different things, right? I mean, like the way I look at it like this, and I'll kind of just make it contextualize it. If you've got a business of any size, there's a couple of things you have to do, right? The first thing you've got to do is you've got to make sure what I call the organic growth of a business works. And that's like, the foundations. It's how you acquire customers, your lead generation, your conversion activity. It's how you build a team. It's how you implement processes and systems and effectively automation. All of those things are what I call table stakes, right? You've got to build a business that can run without you. It's the whole, E-Myth adage of, you want to be the owner, investor, not the owner operator.
Yes.
And the Growth Accelerator Partnership, really, we just created that based on my private equity playbook about, when I go into a business that's struggling or needs to scale up, how do we assess the foundations? And so that's what that is. And then once you get that in place, there's a second play, which is what we call strategic growth, which is acquisitions. And this is where private equity makes all its money. They usually call it buy and build. They'll buy a business that's undervalued. They'll optimize it, like I just said, fixing the foundations. And then they'll buy other businesses in the same industry or adjacent industries, and they'll create a group, and then they'll sell the group for just a hell of a lot of money.
A lot of comments.
Yeah, and I call that exponential growth, because you've got a compounding effect of those two things together. So I've got this little weird equation, Robert, which is OG plus SG equals EG. So organic growth plus strategic growth equals exponential growth, but it's to the power of 10. Now, I do that really for framing, just to show the difference of putting the two things together. Most entrepreneurs and business owners just focus on organic growth, and they think that's the game. What I say to them is that's half the game. So if you want to play the full game and you want to be really successful, back to that life-changing number and all those things, you've got to be able to learn to play both halves of the game.
Wow. And that's and it kind of ties right into what you talk about with keynote speaking, is be brave, have faith, and show up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so as humans, we look at that and we go, oh, that seems like it's doable, but it's not that easy.
No, you got to work on yourself, right? And this is where I think the personal development side of stuff is important. You've got to make sure that you have the energy and the aptitude, back to mindset as well, to be able to achieve big things. Energy is probably the most important out of all of that, and people don't maybe appreciate that enough. That's why, the running was also about looking after myself, maybe on the extreme end of that, but certainly being.
I don't know if the 100-milers is really all that healthy.
No, yeah, exactly. I'm probably a little bit more balanced now, but in terms of having routines around your health, whatever that is for you, I'm never prescriptive about what that should be, but you've got to be able to make sure that if you've got big things that you want to achieve, you've got to look in the mirror and go, am I doing what it takes to achieve those things? Or am I slacking off? And no judgment. If people aren't doing what they need to do, then that's another decision. But it means the thing that you want to create isn't as important.
Right.
And I think that's the other part that sits at the end of what we've talked about today. Is it's great to have big goals and achieve big things, but that showing up, how you show up, is such a critical element of all of it.
That's so true, and that's so. I wanted to ask you this question because I was thinking about it as we're talking, and one of the biggest things is people in life want to find success. And I always say, it's not about being successful, but it's living a life of value.
Yeah.
How have you felt your life? How have you seen the value of your, in essence, successes in your life?
I look at it as two separate things, because when I judge things differently is the short answer, right? So success back before I had the teeth incident was it was money. It was money and status, right? It was like, how many Porsches can I fit in the driveway? I had 2 back then.
Do you need to get rid of one?
I got rid of both of them, actually. I got rid of both. I got rid
nice.
of, but that was partly a sentiment. Right? Because I saw them as tokens of my old world, right? Listen, I'm not against nice cars and nice houses and stuff like that, but I think for me at that point in time, I needed to make a change. So before the teeth incident, it was about money and significance. Now it's still about financial success. I haven't sort of given all my stuff away and, walk around the world, with no shoes on. But it's also about greater impact. And there was one quote that I learned. I'll give you this because it changed everything. It's an often used quote, but it was by Zig Ziglar. It was, you can get everything you want in life if you just help enough people get what they want and need in life. And I heard that quote it was about a month after the teeth thing. And that one quote changed my whole belief system about what I needed to focus on.
Wow. That's, yeah.
I know, crazy, isn't it? But it was like the whole red and the blue pill from the Matrix. Literally, I saw a totally different way of operating, which could give me both success, status, all those things, financial success, but also impact, and therefore I would be more fulfilled as well as having high levels of achievement. So I realized I could do both things.
Wow. Make sure you go to nickcbradley.com. Find out he's a great speaker. He can make sure that you actually understand how to be successful, but not just successful, but be of value. Listen to his podcast as well. Nick, it's been such a great time. I have 3 questions for you. And I don't give them to you before because I want to have you sweat a little, but since you've done like 24 full ultra marathons, I don't think you're going to sweat all that bad.
I'm up for everything, Robert. Don't worry.
I love it. All right. So the first question would be if you could go back to your 18-year-old self and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh, 18 was an interesting year for me because I did a few different things. I started my first business at 18. It would be trust yourself.
I would like that one.
That would be my message. Trust yourself.
And why would that be at that time?
Because I when I started that business, I sold it 2 or 3 years later, and then sort of went into this different world, which wasn't really my mission. It was someone else's mission. I was trying to please others, lots of others, but not really myself for various reasons. And I think it was because I wasn't brave enough back then to really follow what I wanted or knew I wanted. And I think what's happened, if you jump forward 20 or 30 years, what I've come back to doing now was what I was starting to do at 18. And I don't look at that and going, oh, wow, perhaps I could have continued on that path, because I think the journey I went on has now opened up a different path. It kind of segues back a little bit, Robert, to what you said about, the path is never going to be linear. It's going to be, all sorts of things. Right. But I think if I trusted myself more back then maybe I would have circumvented a bit of time, maybe.
I love it. All right, here's the second question. For the audience, there's a lot of people that are going through struggles and challenges in their lives, be it big or small. What would you say are 2 things that they should incorporate into their life now daily to help start their life moving forward?
So the one thing that really helped me, and again, it's often said, is meditation. Or just giving yourself a practice of silence and just slowing things down. One of my mentors said to me, "It's best to slow down before you speed up," and meditation is definitely that. So that's the first thing that I would do. The second thing that I think is important is to have a cadence around how you set goals. And the way I do that is I do it every 90 days. So I sort of set some intentions for the year, and I have a bigger vision that goes out a number of years. But I work on this 90-day cadence, and I work on what are the big, 3 to 5 things that I want to achieve as results, as outcomes in the next 90 days. And I look at them through the lens of a few different things. Like it could be relationships, fitness. It could be, making a bigger contribution. It could be business. But I don't try and have a goal for each area. I just say, what's the most important thing in this season now? And that might be to build the business. It might be to get in better shape for something. It might be that I need to put more time into my family. But that 90-day cadence of goal setting and just setting them as results, not just things, makes a big difference, I find.
Oh, I like that one. I've got a whole page of notes that I need to do for myself. I'm sure other people are doing the same thing now.
It's something I learned from my mentors, and it's made a big difference. And I'm very intentional about it now. It doesn't have to take too long either. It doesn't have to be something that's overwhelming. No,
I love that cadence. That really kind of hit my mindset of that 90 days, giving yourself those goals. It also gives you that peace of mind that you can achieve something and then continue to achieve, because so many people do that 5-year plan, and for 5 years you don't feel like you have achieved anything.
It's too far out. The 90 days feels accessible to most people, and because the other thing I'll say quickly is a week in a year doesn't feel like much. If you miss a week in a year, no one cares. If you miss a week in 12 weeks, it feels like something substantial. So therefore, it just shortens the time frame.
I love that. Love that. All right, this last question is fun because I've heard things all over the board. So, if you had a chance to have coffee with 3 individuals, they can be deceased or alive, at a firehouse table. So, in other words, you can ask them anything, and all answers have to be on the table. Who would the 3 people be, and why?
Oh, see, this is where I automatically default into sort of hero status, right? So one of them is my grandfather, because he passed away a number of years ago now, and there's probably things that I've learned in myself since then that I'd like to go back and have a different conversation with him.
Love it.
Now for a hero, both and not to say my grandfather isn't one, but I'd love to meet Kobe Bryant, because he was a big influencer. I've been a massive basketball fan, have been for years and years and years and years. And when I was sort of in the 80s, certainly the 90s, I was kind of Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. Yes. And then Kobe came in. And the fact that he passed away so suddenly, almost at the cusp of creating another level of greatness.
Yep.
I would just love to unpack his mindset. I've read many books, and I just think there's some stuff that he does there which is fascinating.
Yeah.
And the last one is someone who's had a big influence in my life, and that's Tony Robbins. And he was the person who helped shifted where I am today from where I was. So when I said about the teeth incident and I went away for 3 or 4 weeks, I went away 3 or 4 weeks later, I went to one of his events in Chicago, and it was there that I first saw that quote, the Zig Ziglar quote.
Yes.
And you know what? I would just love to go a little bit deeper on some of the perspectives on that, because he's been certainly someone who's helped shape, the success I've had since, all the other stuff we spoke about. So there you go.
That is a good. I'll serve you guys coffee all day long.
That's a conversation. Usually, if they're all there together, I don't think my grandfather would get on very well with Tony Robbins, because my grandfather was a bit like, "What's this sort of stuff?" But
it's different perspective.
That might be separate.
I love it. Well, Nick, make sure you guys go to nickcbradley.com and find out more. And also, if you're looking for a great podcast to listen to, Scale Up Your Business with Nick Bradley. Nick, it's been a pleasure to have you on today.
Yeah, Robert, I've enjoyed it very much, mate. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks for joining us today. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening and supporting the Forged in the Fires podcast with Fireman Rob. Remember, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast, and please share this episode with a friend or family. To find out more about Fireman Rob or reach out about a question, go to www.firemanrob.com. Until next time, live your life forged in the fires.